The racial wealth gap seems to be getting wider and wider each generation. Why is that? And what is it that you could do to help protect your family? We're going to discuss that today on generational wealth for African Americans on today's The Sirwalterj Show. Hello everybody, The Sirwalterj Show. I'm he. It is the midday connection, baby. It's Monday afternoon, and we're talking about generational wealth for African Americans. Every Monday we'll be doing this at 3 p.m. Central. For those of you out there in America and the world, and the Mr. and Mrs. America, and the boys and the girls at sea, I just want to thank you for tuning in as we reboot this show. I'm going to talk about this wealth gap because it's quite interesting, and it's something that you need to know. Listen. It's not your fault. Pretty much it. It is not your fault, this wealth gap between whites and blacks and and Hispanics. It's not your fault. This is an established, systematic thing that happened to us all the way back, and I'll show you on the map here. It is a joint effort to keep the gap the way it is and make sure that the gap widens even more. So don't think that, believe it or not, things are not getting better under the Trump administration. Things are getting worse. He just showing you some of the people who are benefiting from his administration as African Americans. There's some who are benefiting, but as a whole, the gap is widening and widening. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about this. The racial gap. What I want to show you here is here's the statistics here as far as savings and assets and debt. What the median income is for those who are white and black. Savings plus the assets minus the debt. Of course, those of you who understand the balance sheet, $171,000 is the median income for whites. That same setup, same balance sheet for blacks is $17,600. Look at that gap. That gap is huge. That's a huge gap. And guess what? That gap will be widening and widening as we go further, not just in this administration, but as we go further and further into the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's going to get so bad unless you do something about it. And I said earlier, but this is systematic. When you go back to slavery, for those of you who are watching us in the year 2019, where, well, I don't want to use the word celebrate, but observe 400 years of this type of systematic injustice to black people who come from the African nations and around the world. 1619 to 1865, we know that it was slavery. There was nothing that your parents, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, former slaves could do. There was nothing that they could do because that's the time of slavery. And then after slavery ended, 1865 to 1968, then came legal discrimination. Legal discrimination. They discriminated against you because of your color. You can't really name any nation that were in slavery, had a system of slavery during the time of the 1600s, and after they ended their slavery, most of the slavery going all the way back to biblical times wasn't really about a person's skin color. It was about class, casteism. It was about your economic status. That enslaved you, all right, or it didn't. But in America, you were enslaved or you were treated unfairly, discrimination upon you because not so much of your class, but because of your skin color. And this is the only nation that I can think of that treated their former slave system like that. So legal discrimination. You were born the wrong color in the eyes of many in America. And then after 1968, and I'll tell you what happened there over here, 1968 to 2018, then came the continued discrimination and what we all call the new Jim Crow. and of course the penal system, the prison system, the prison industrial complex is what it's pretty much called. All right, and it all started here in 1865. That's what it started, this wealth gap. We can't go back to 1619. We got to go to 1865, and it was after the signing of the bill. Oh, this whole Emancipation Proclamation, we know it only freed certain people. All right, and those of you who are watching this live, this is New Year's Eve, and many African Americans will be going to church, their church houses tonight, to observe what's called Watch Night. Well, it's got a lot to do with this here. 1865, the General William Sherman and Secretary Edward Stanton got together and said, what we're going to do with all of these freed men, these former slaves, and they decided to get together with the clergy of that town, of that area, and talk to them to see what is it that they could do to help these men and these women and these children get on their feet. Not so much get back on their feet, but they never were on their feet. Get on your feet to have some kind of independence. And they spoke with a Reverend Garrison Fraser. For those of you who know anything about Google, go ahead and type his name in there, because many times we don't hear about him. Many of you have never heard about him. And I watched a Vox documentary, and I'm going to be quoting from the Vox documentary on here. It's an amazing doc, and they do a great job of doing history. And so Reverend Garrison Fraser, he was 67 years old at the time, and he pretty much says, here's what we need to do to build wealth or independence within these freed slaves. Now it is all about real estate. It's about ownership of land. And those of you heard about the, Spike Lee's, his production company is called 40 Acres and a Mule. Well, here we go here. All right. Well, 40 acres of tillable, that is 40 acres of tillable ground, was something that they decided to give to the slaves through the suggestion of Reverend Garrison Fraser and the men, the clergy of that time. They told William Sherman and Edwin Stanton to give them 40 acres of land, and they established this under the Abraham Lincoln administration. Well, what happens next? Lincoln signs this bill right before his second inauguration address. He signs this bill to give 40 acres to the slaves. What happened? Lincoln goes to see a movie. He went to go see Birdcage. I don't know what's the name of this show y'all keep talking about, all right? He went to the movies, and he got shot. He was assassinated, and Andrew Johnson became the president of the United States. Andrew Johnson was a racist, a bigot, and he felt that giving slaves 40 acres of land is a disjustice to whites. And so he felt that white people were treated unfairly. They were being discriminated upon. And so he reversed this bill. He reversed the tillable ground bill, and here we have it. All right? Well, what was going on? Wealth was built on the backs of African Americans and was given to the whites. 246 years of wealth that African Americans built and obtained for white slave owners, and through these plantations and through cotton being king, well, they couldn't get any of it because of Andrew Johnson. All right? Fast forward down into the, I guess you can say, 1929, the stock market crash, and we're into the 1930s of the Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt comes on the scene. He's his longest serving president, well loved by many and hated by others. All right, he issued this New Deal, and this New Deal helped give mortgages to those who needed it. Okay, and he established this Federal Housing Administration. I think it was the FHA. All right, it was a great deal. Unfortunately, what happened was that deal was the whites benefited from that deal more than anybody. All right. And as you go on into history, many of you begin to hear about the whole thing about redlining. So these banks were benefiting from it because it was a way to lend money out to those who, especially going into World War II, and coming out of it, this whole deal was being felt negatively by African Americans. Understand that, all right? So in came this thing called redlining, where you would go to the bank, African Americans, you would go to the bank, and, well, first of all, it was hard to get a loan. When we look at the shows of the 1940s and 50s, and, you know, Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and God, all these shows where the father would come home and the mother would have her Sunday gold best dress on. She always had that pearl. June Cleaver always had the pearls, you know. He'd come home and ask for his pipe and his slippers, and the dog would lick him, and the children would come running into his arms, and he's sitting there, lazy boy, and he'd turn on the television or watch the radio. Okay, the fireside chats with the same guy, Roosevelt. And that was what we were seeing on our TVs in the 1950s. And we assumed that that's the way white America was living. That was not actually a depiction. That was Hollywood's depiction of what they wanted us to believe. But many African Americans were not living that kind of posh life. Although the father was in the home of many African American homes. The father was there. Whites didn't think that the father was there. If you look at the YouTube video called Selling to the Negro, it pretty much gives you an idea of what whites thought about us. And once they realized that we made money, we kept money, our forefathers, these were our grandfathers. When you look at the video, these are pretty much our grandfathers. They understood the importance of savings, and so, well, what did retail do? They took advantage of it, and that's why you see the video. Go and see it. But the redlining, a federal enforced segregation. That's what redlining pretty much was. It was not just the individual, the banks. It was not just whites in certain neighborhoods, but it was federally enforced. That's what it was. All right. And so what happens is, because there were green lines and there were red lines, you see a map. There are literal maps, old maps, where you see red lines and you see green lines. There's a wall there, and usually where the red line were, those were the homes where you and your grandfather moved. He was able to buy homes over there. But over there, the schools were not that great. I remember moving on the west side with our family. I moved there. I was the first child to move on the west side of Chicago. It's 9 of us, and this was in 1966, I believe. And when we moved in the neighborhood on Albany Street, there was probably about 3 whites left, because the whole thing about white flight, they started seeing black people move in. But I also noticed that when we went to the schools, that the school system, as I got older, I realized that the school system could not or did not offer us what some of my white friends were getting up north Chicago. Our books were old and tattered and outdated. We were studying things that was actually on its way out. We were studying. We didn't really calculators were quite expensive, because we just didn't have them. We had that abacus, what you call that thing, okay? We studied Morse code. Morse code was an old World War II way of communicating, and they was teaching us Morse code in our schools, all right? And the teachers seemed like they really didn't care as much. They were babysitting us back in that time, and and I didn't notice that until I got older. And we lived where the factories were. It was nothing for us to be playing outside, and we would smell the fresh smell of bread and candy and the smokestacks of the factories, because we lived in a commercially dominated factory area, okay? But I believe that we were part of the red line. Fast forward now, many of the whites who moved to the suburbs are now moving back into those neighborhoods where the red line was, and now these red lines are turning into green line, and I think the word gentrification pops up quite a bit in your ears now. In the red line districts and areas of where we lived, also we noticed and not just the schools were not that great, but the stores, the food was not that fresh. All right, it seemed to be a little costly. The service was not that great, although we knew our grocer. We talked to the grocer. Also, there were no African American business. There were some. There were little candy stores at 5 and dimes that were around during the 1960s and 70s, but then they began to move out, close their doors to mom and pops. And then the Indians from India began to move their businesses in. The Asians began to move, well, India and Asia, the same thing, okay? They began to move their business in as well. So we began to see different types of services come to our area, all right? And that's the way it was, redlining, the access to jobs and there's safe schools for kids. And then the gangs were able to make we had the disciples in our neighborhood, and across the street was the Peastone Rangers, and then the Vice Lords were up that way, and the El Rickons were over here. And that's the way it was in those red line districts, okay? Now, did the home increase in value? No, the value of the homes went down. And this is the purpose of the white flight, because one black person moving in the neighborhood caused the property to dive in value. And that's why they tried to keep you out. That's why they were in cahoots with well, not just white banks, but with the banks in general, to not offer you these loans, but to make sure that, first of all, that you don't get the loans. But if you did get the loans, they would offer you a home, make sure that that home was in a red line area. If you move into a white neighborhood, though, and the neighborhood knew that you were moving in that white neighborhood, they would get together and they would, what is it called? They would come and buy the home. They would offer you more for the home than buy you out. Or if a white person was selling the home and put it for sale, and they noticed that African Americans were interested in it, the neighborhood would come together, pull their monies together, and buy that home, and then sell it to a white owner. That's just the way it was. Okay. And then I look at 1968. I mentioned this bill was passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson. It was the housing discrimination bill that allow us to go in there and get mortgages. All right. Hooray, Mr. Johnson, who also signed the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. He did quite a bit. The problem with that, though, is that even though they were kind of trying to stop this discrimination from happening, discrimination didn't stop, obviously, but they found different ways of making sure that you would not get the loans. And if you did, they found ways of continuing to make sure that in the long term, you would lose that house. And what would they do? Well, they would offer you, they would give you a loan. We started to see this in the Bill Clinton administration, all right, when he was doing these things, and African Americans thought that he was doing a great deed for us. When we know about this whole prison thing. They came together to try and get the banks to offer loans to African Americans, and they were doing this. But when we go back and blame George Bush for this thing that happened in 2008, or with the housing, didn't start with George Bush. I believe it started with with Bill Clinton, because the banks began, especially Wells Fargo, because Wells Fargo continued to get in trouble for this type of practice. They were offering these loans to African Americans, no money down. I mean, the average is a 20%, down payment with proper credit, and you have to be on your job for a couple of years and all these things. So it was not that easy to get a loan. But then they made it absolutely easy to get one, no money down. But what they were doing was offering these what's called ghetto loans, or these subprime loans. Okay. So what happens? What is the subprime loan? Starts off cheap. Your mortgage could have been $800, $900 a month. And some of my friends went out there and bought these big homes that was costing $300,000. All right, knowing good and well they could not afford it. All right, but they didn't understand how this thing began to accelerate. So they got these loans, and it began to balloon off scale. And these subprime loans just got, before you know that $800 a month mortgage was $900 and $1,000 and $1,100 and $1,200. And then they realized, oh my God, what's happening? Ah, here it is. Okay. And that happened over years and years and years. And then poof, 2008. And this is when we saw this big bubble happen. All right. So the Wells Fargo, they targeted African Americans. Then they didn't just target you as an individual, though. They also targeted your church. Those of you who are a part of especially the Pentecostal church, I'm not just Pentecostals, Baptists, and you name it. A lot of you are in churches right now where you have been paying a mortgage for 20, 25, 30, 40 years now, and you keep refinancing. Why? Because you might be a child or a result or the seed of this mess in the 1990s where you got a subprime loan. And they really went after these churches and they made sure that the pastor, the preacher, see, the preacher has always been used. And I'm going to talk about this possibly on Friday when I do fireside chats on Friday. The preacher, okay, was used, always used, all the way back to the from 1619 all the way to today. The black pastor has been used, always been used to help in enforcing discrimination and racism and bigotry. All right, this whole systematic thing. African American pastors. Why? Because they understand that we follow them because we are personality based. Our worship is personality based. All right, on Sundays, and we follow the leadership of our pastors, and whatever he or she say is gold. It is law. And so if the institution goes to the preacher, they go to the preacher because they know that the preacher has an influence over these thousands of members. And it benefits the banks because the banks was offering the church these toxic ghetto loans. And in return, they would say, if we would make a donation to your church if one of the members get a loan, a mortgage from our bank. Some of you out there are saying amen because it happened to you. It happened to your church. So there are many churches out there right now who took out a loan in the mid 1990s. It's been 25 years later and they owe the same thing. If they bought the church for $1 million in 1995, they still owe $1 million or maybe more because they had just been paying on the interest and can barely touch the principal. And this is what's happening in a lot of churches today. I know, Elisa, I'm about to get in trouble. Yeah, I know. All right. So that's what's happening. I've seen this in Chicago a lot. So whose fault? Who's the fault now for the continued enforcement of this institution of this gap? Who's at fault right now? Well, you were not initially at fault, but you will be charged with this assault because you are continuing to allow the banks and the federal government and the political parties to manipulate you and make you believe that you're doing great. But when you look at the financial records, you're doing worse than you think you are. You're like a husband who think that things are going fine at home. Man, I took out the garbage 2 weeks ago. I'm fine. I had sex with my wife about maybe 3 weeks. Man, we doing fine. Boy, we doing good. I paid my bills and we're doing great. And then he come home and the house is empty. All the furniture gone because the marriage was not as great as he thought it was. And that's the way the church act. That's the way many African Americans act today. They think things are fine, but when they reflect and look at the big picture, things are not as great as you think. So you need to talk to your pastor, educate your pastors and your leaders on this kind of stuff so that they can find a way to get out of this so that we won't keep putting our brothers and sisters and our children into this mess, because we build these $1 million churches and then we get up in age and then we go into retirement and then we get sick. Some of us die. Our children are now members of that church, and now the children are having to pay the mortgage on a church that should have paid the mortgage off 20 years. All right. You buy a 30-year mortgage you should be paying that mortgage off in 10, 15 years. All right. You should be doing that. That's the way white folk do it. So the black church hold on to these mortgages, and now they're in the next generation, and the next generation is paying on a mortgage that I can't do this. I shouldn't do this, and I'm gonna stop. All right. So then this housing crash happened in 2008, and then they instituted this TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program. They put $440 billion into this TARP fund to help you. And guess what? It didn't go to you. You didn't get none of that stuff. The banks were too large to fail, and they had to bail out the banks. The same institution that put us in this mess, the government had to bail it out, because if they didn't bail it out, a trickle-down effect would happen, more of a domino effect would happen, and it would have been a worse state if they didn't bail it out. It is the greatest Ponzi scheme I've seen in any type of reading and examining history since the 70s, when I came into consciousness. Okay, I came into consciousness in the 70s. I wasn't born in the 70s. All right, and I'll talk about that probably next week. Okay, and so you who are in college, or you have children in college right now, if a white boy graduates from college with a PhD, this black boy graduates from college with a PhD, they both are studying the same thing, psychology. All right, or whatever they could be doctors, lawyers, or Indian chiefs. This white kid still is worth more than this black kid. It's not so much because of their skin color, not so much because of that or what they've done, but it's more so on what the family, they examined this, what the family of the black boy is doing to him. You understand? See, this white kid come up under a different type of system. I meant an economic understanding on what to do with your money. You get it? All right. So he was from birth, was raised and trained around how to properly manage the money. Well, it is an advantage because, first of all, he's a white kid, so he already have a Caucasian advantage. But he's in a different neighborhood, under different teachings, and the schools are better. There are businesses that are set up in his area. All right, the grocery stores are better. Everything's just better for him. It works for him. The African American kid who went to the same college, he got the same degree, same work that he does, his family pulls on him. They pull him because they see that he come up. So if he's at church, or if he's in a neighborhood, or if he's at a family reunion, what have you, they look and they see him as ka-ching, and they begin to ask him, borrow from him, okay? Try to get him to do this and support this, and now put this guy in school and what have you. So he can't really come up because now he's giving out. And that's when they did that study, they realized this is one reason why the gap is the way it is. Also, I've noticed that I mentioned the political party. Many who are part of the political party of the Democrats, I believe that the Democratic Party has systematically kept many of you poor. And you look at the history from the 1800s all the way up, it is the Democratic Party who instituted this Jim Crow and gave us the Ku Klux Klan, and gave us these laws and suppressed us in the South with the voting discrimination and things like that. It was the Democratic Party. That's the way it was. You can't. It's difficult to understand it. The party that you keep voting for. Now I know, and there's a fight against how things split. How the Democratic Party became the Republican Party of today, and back and forth, and much of that is correct. But we can talk about that on our Fireside Friday show, because that show is geared to politics and religion. All right. So we keep doing the same thing. And again, that's the definition of insanity. So we keep voting for the same people who keep us in a place of entitlement and pulling on the government for relief when we're not building our own individual relief. All right. When these bailouts. OK, why are you depending on the government to bail you out when you should have been putting things in place before bad things happened? OK, so here are some of the statistics. According to the New York Times, for every $100 in a white family, the black family holds $5. You meet a white guy on the street, he got $100 on him, you got $5. That's the way it is. The Economic Policy Institute found that more than 1 in 4 black households have 0 or negative net worth, compared to less than 1 in 10 white families without wealth. The Institute for Policy Studies recent report, The Road to Zero Wealth, it's called, How the Racial Divide in Hollowing Out the American Middle Class, the RZW. It's a great read. You can go online and get it for free. The RZW showed that between 1983 and 2013, the wealth of the median black household declined 75%, from $6,000 to $1,000, and the median Latino household declined 50%. All right. You might think that the economic outlook for the black community and the other people of color has gotten better lately, and it has not. Giving our president touting black unemployment is as low as it ever been. He keeps talking about. Yet this report shows that far from getting better, the total economic picture for black people is still deteriorating. In fact, by 2020, that's just another year from now, black and Latino households are projected to lose even more wealth. 18% of the 18% for the former, 12% for the latter. After those declines, the median white household will own 86 times. The median white household will own 86 times more wealth than its black counterpart, and 68 times more wealth than Latinos. And if the trend continues, the median black household wealth will hit 0 by 2053. That's what's going on here. So this is an article by Brian Thompson. He's a writer of Forbes, and he's given a suggestion here. What can you do? Now his suggestions are more of a collective force, because I want to delve as I continue on my Monday shows on individual things that you can do. But this is a collective thing because it's important. It's quite important. There is no better party. Each one has good and bad ethical policies, the actress is saying. She's correct here. And it's Democrats that forced our weakest people out of their homes to replace with upper income people. Yeah, that's true, Anthony Owens. I'm with the actress even more so. There is no perfect party out there. One party talks about what they have done and what they can do, but I would adjure you to read up on the history of these parties and look at the economical stands when it was under the Republican Party, when it was up under Ronald Reagan for 2 terms, and then and a 3rd term with his Vice President Bush. All right, so there's 3 terms under the Republican Party. Now look at what happened with the wealth gap between African Americans and whites in those 3 terms. That's 4 plus 4 plus 4 years. See what happened there under the Republican Party. So those of you who are bragging about it, look at it. I think the Republicans took the White House after George Bush was done. Bill Clinton came on the scene and he served 2 terms. All right, and look at the gap. After him, the Republicans got back into the seat, served 2 terms. Look at the gap. So can you tell me that the Republican Party was better than the Democrat, or vice versa? Because as far as I'm concerned, economically, the gap keeps widening no matter who the party is. So can somebody help me with that? Okay, nobody can help me with that. Racial wealth inequality is a huge problem that not only affects communities of color, but also will have a lasting impact on our country as a whole. Some 70% of our economic growth comes from consumer spending. And as black and Latino households grow to become the majority of the population, their inability to spend due to the lack of wealth and paying down debt will slow economic growth. And so we owe it to ourselves and future generations to start correcting this problem. People, here's the answer. Please pay down your debt. Pay down your debt. Those of you who've got all these credit cards, it is killing you in interest rates. And the feds, if they raise the rate 0.5%, it's going to kill you with those high balances on your credit cards. Okay, that's what's really killing you. Those credit cards, and of course those APRs, those mortgages. Okay, those interest rates here and there, they are going to kill you. The ones who are benefiting from the Feds raising the rates are those who are investing in the stock market, those who are in securities and buying bonds and stocks and what have you. Okay, and commodities. Look at those who have a retirement. Okay, those who are saving on retirement, where the banks are offering certain types of rates, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3% and up. All right, those are benefiting those when the rates are hiked up by the feds. But those who are in debt, all right, those who have debt, it's killing them. So the way to come out of this system is to pay off your debts in 2019. Please, people, I overly emphasize the importance of paying down your debt. Do your best to become debt-free in 1 year. Many of you can do that. Absolutely, you can. He talked about spreading the word. First and foremost, we need to spread the word, as pointing out in the New York Times. He goes on, and that is true, and that's what I'm doing right now. Spreading the word on what happened and what is it that you can do to cause that gap to come a little closer. Now, some of you says, I really don't care what these white boys are making. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me at all. This is true. This is why this show is called Generational Wealth for African Americans. It's not called individual. It's generational wealth, because should you not worry about where your children or grandchildren are going to go to school? Should you not worry about the economical status quo of your neighborhood or your city or town or America at large? Do you not know that your child is being raised up in America unless he's going to move to another country? Should you not be concerned that in 2053 that the median income of African Americans will be zero if at this rate? So surely you should be worried about what white folks are making opposed to what you're making, because if that continues, what's going to happen to your children in this world? You can't continue, and this is what the government do. They go and borrow money, and then they got all these interest on that, and they benefit from this. That will affect your grandchildren later on. Your grandchildren will be paying for the mess that America is in right now. They don't care right now. What they're doing is they're kicking the can down the street. And one day that can is going to hit your great-great-grandkid in the face. And now that kid's got to pay for that can. That's what's going on in America. It's a Ponzi scheme. But once you realize how the Ponzi scheme works, you could get on top of it. All right. So as I go on and on Mondays, I'll talk about what you can do to better your life and your children's life as far as wealth is concerned. Because poor people, they live check to check, but rich people, they live year to year. Okay, but wealthy people, they live generation to generation. When this child, when two people get married and they get pregnant, they think about generational wealth, because they go down there to their investor, their financial advisor, and get a 529 plan to get this kid in college 18 years from now. Why? Because they're not thinking about the next paycheck. They're not thinking about next year. They're thinking about the next generation. And so that's why they are smart and wise. My father thought about generational wealth when he began to build that same little place that we moved into in 1966. My father was a carpenter. He was a blue-collar worker. And back then, they didn't really teach us. They didn't inspire us to go off to college. They inspired us to go to trade school. They inspired us to sit up under someone who was blue-collar workers. That's the way it was when I came up. It's different today. All right. And so my father was that. That's why many of my brothers are in that kind of sector, that blue-collar sector. They're carpenters, and they're darn good at it. Also, and they're independent, they're entrepreneurs, they're self-employed, because my father and his father, that's the way it was, and my uncles, that's the way it was. It still is. All right. And so he began to buy up the property in that neighborhood in the 1970s. And so he bought a unit there, and then he bought another one, and then he bought another one, and then he bought another unit, and then he bought the building where I was raised up in. Why? Because he understood that I'm not doing this for myself or his wife per se. He was doing it for his children. He did it for me and my 8 siblings. Okay, he was teaching us generational wealth back in the 70s. It's not too many black families are doing that today, but my father did it today, and this is why I'm able to talk about this stuff today. All right. So my father sits on these nest eggs. Okay. And how did African Americans become wealthy? They became wealthy through real estate, and whites knew that that's what the wealth came from, and that's why they tried to stop it. So it goes back to Father Garrison Fraser suggested it, and Abraham Lincoln co-signed it. They killed that man, and Andrew Johnson came on the scene, and he killed the bill. And since Andrew Johnson, up until now, it has been a struggle. African Americans became wealthy through ownership. And so I'm going to do a show on how to own and control your own. For those of you who don't want to get into real estate and buying land and property, that's fine. There's so many other ways to own what you have. All right. So this is a great article. Support policies to end discrimination and engender parities. You talk about financial education, and it goes on. We can always do that show later on. All right. I'm done. Didn't want to go very long. I just want you to see what's going on here with the show. This is the way we're going to go every Monday. Generational wealth for African Americans every Monday at 3:00 p.m. Do me a favor and hit the share button if you're on Facebook. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and comment below, and I'll go ahead and read it and see if I can engage with you back and forth and see what you got. Right? You got any suggestions for any upcoming shows for Mondays? I got you. All our shows will be done on the whiteboard. All right? For those of you who still on Facebook Live, I'll be doing the show tomorrow. It's called A Book and a Song. We're going to be interviewing, well, we're not going to be interviewing, but we're going to be going through this book by Carlos L. Moody Sr. It's called What Happens When You Say Yes, Lord. All right. This is my pastor. It is not his first book. I believe it's his second book, but it's a great read. All right. Take care. Save and pour back into your children. Do it now. Y'all making New Year's resolutions. The best time to make a New Year's resolution is when you think about it, and that's the previous year. So if it's December 31st, you need to start doing your New Year's resolution now. Don't wait till tomorrow. It's up here. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Take care.